Runaway Train was one of the best movies, if not the best movie produced by Canon Films. It was able to merge real-life railroad shots with green screens. The movie grossed almost $8 million and was nominated for a few awards, with Jon Voight winning a Golden Globe from it, and the movie winning an award for the best motion picture sound editing at the time. But think of this. What if I told you that movie was based on a real event? Many people overshadow this due to runaways like Black Mechanic, the Crazy Eights, or the Cajon Pass runaways. But the Runaway would soon serve as the basis to the 1985 movie we all know today. On October 26, 1962, Joseph Jarris was preparing 4 New York Central GP20s for NC1 from East Syracuse, New York. Jarris was responsible for making sure that the sanding on the units worked properly. While he was working on the second engine's cab, the engines were being moved by yard engineer Robert Cox to be refueled for the run, inspected for anything that could be going wrong with the engines, and to the ready track, where Cox would be taken over by actual road crew. However, as the train started to move backwards, it was discovered that Cox was unconscious and off the train, and by the time the engines were moving, as Jarris noticed, it was already going up to speeds where it would be basically suicide to jump off. And that's when the journey to hell happened. The train roared by Clark Street Tower, where the men in the yard tower were alerted to the engines and contacted dispatch in Rochester. After dispatch told the yard tower to send the Runaway on the main line, Clark Street Tower did just that. It was expected that the train would stop after passing the signal at danger, but turns out, while in full power, the brakes were already applied on the GP20s. So as the brakes burned off the Runaway, they hurtled off into the night. On the train, Jim Jarris raced in one of the GP20s for an inevitable crash. He didn't know how to turn on the interior lights nor stop the train, so he just had to hold on in the dark cab of the locomotive. Over in Rochester Dispatch, Trainmaster Robert McDonald entered the building as multiple freight trains were being juggled out of harm's way by dispatcher Sam Gaglia. The two men knew that the 4 engines would have made a bridge above the Seneca River collapse if it went over a recommended speed. The first thought that McDonald and Giglia thought about was derailing the train in the small community at Jordan, but due to how costly the result would be, they decided to not go through with the idea. That's when a foreman rushed in with a report that Jim Jarris was missing after a head count. And that's when they all knew that Jarris was on the train. At 85 miles per hour, the train somehow stayed on the rails after crossing the old bridge. It also held on several curves, but that's when the people in Rochester Dispatch noticed that the train, if not tended to, could wipe out a chemical plant. To avoid the situation, they decided upon removing 2 engines from sideline WB3 and having them give chase to the 4 engines. The 2 engines, however, couldn't reach the speed of the 4 locomotives, so McDonald and Giglia had no choice but to derail the engines. With the little knowledge he had on the engines, Jarris on the GP20s decided that he would stop the train. He started from rear to front, shutting down the engines by disconnecting the MU cables. Eventually, he got to the front engine and shut it down, ending that 89-mile ride to hell. After he got off, he used handfuls of ballast as wheel chocks. A switching locomotive pulled up at the scene, with the crew seeing Jarris shaken but alive. The recorder recorded the top speed of the GP20s at 92 miles per hour, but witness accounts placed the top speed at an astonishing 121 miles per hour. However, what on earth caused this runaway to occur? Well, going back to Robert Cox, no one really knows what happened. Whether he had lost balance, a certain condition hit him, or whether he just wasn't paying attention. We may never know. But whatever the case, the blame was definitely on crewman Cox. However, the following year, in the March 29th, 1963 Life magazine, Akira Kurosawa read about the story and came up with an adaptation. It had a rather rocky production, but eventually, with the help of director Andrei Konchalovsky, John Voight, Eric Roberts, and Rebecca De Mornay made their way into the big screen in 1985. De Mornay's character, Sarah McGuire, was largely based on Joseph Jarris. Not to mention that the movie would help spark the careers of Danny Trejo and Tommy Lester Jr. It would also retell the story of that fateful fall day in 1962. When Jarris heard about the Crazy 8's runaway, he couldn't help but be reminded of that train to hell that he was a passenger in. And unfortunately, from the looks of it, more trains are just going to keep running away, despite having positive train control or not.